What's up, everyone? My name is James Cool. I'm the owner of Paydirt DFS.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Week 13 NFL DFS slate. Typically, this is either a stream, usually a stream, or a video that I post the night before, if I don't get to do a stream. This week, I did not get to do either of those things because being a father is hard. But I am going to put together a shorter video this morning so that we can break things down the same way that I usually do. If you're not involved usually in those streams, or if you haven't watched videos before, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the top down, and then we're going to look at the macro stuff, so team totals, game environments, projected touchdown totals, everything like that. And then we're going to move on to stacking ideas, what the projections say about what the best stacks are and how we should approach those kind of things. And then we're going to take a look at a little bit of chalk in each individual position, and then finally we're going to take a look at the stack finder so that we can weed out stacks based on ownership. So that's going to be how we go about things. This video shouldn't take longer than 15-20 minutes this morning. It's a pretty straightforward slate, all things considered. So let's go ahead and jump into it. The first thing we usually start with here is team totals, and I will open up full screen here. Miami, Washington is the highest overall team total on the slate for Miami at 29.5. It is also the highest game total. And you can find this, by the way. This is a free set of research tools that you can find here at Paydirt. Highest game environment is 49.5, almost a 50 game total. We've had a serious lack of game totals over 50 this year. And I'm not sure why that is, but it feels like we haven't had a game total over 50 in weeks. Maybe it just speaks to the parity of the NFL. But the highest game total is 49.5 for Washington, Miami. And then we have a 48 game total with Philadelphia, San Francisco. That game should probably have the best game environment. It's two of the best teams facing each other. Seattle, Dallas happened yesterday. And that was a 47.5 game total. And then we have Houston and Denver at 47.5 as well. And then the other higher game total this week is New Orleans and Detroit. After that, it is a serious drop-off in game totals. It goes from 47 all the way down to 42.5, which is Indianapolis and Tennessee. We have Green Bay and Kansas City, but that happens on Sunday night. That's a showdown slate. So overall, we're really just focusing on these four games, right? Washington, Miami, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Denver, Houston, New Orleans, Detroit. And of those four, really, New Orleans, Detroit isn't going to get a lot of ownership, mostly because people are looking at New Orleans as a team that can't really pass and isn't that explosive, and Detroit as a team that's happy to just pat or run the ball when they're up. They have the highest designed rushing attempt projection. So it's really just three games that we're looking at. If we sort by team totals here, Miami has the highest team total, 29.5. Pretty nice. Then we have Detroit at 25.5, a 4-point drop from the highest, which is massive. Followed by San Francisco at 25.5 and Houston at 25.25. And then we have Pittsburgh actually at 23.75, which is a really, really high team total for a team like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is not averaging that many points this year. I can actually go and take a look really quick to see what they are averaging. Move this over here. And we can look at Team UR view. Yeah, so Pittsburgh with a implied team total of 23.75, they are averaging on the year just 16.55 points per game. So a full touchdown above what their season totals usually are. That's a lot, and that's something to pay attention to. I don't know if the market is overreacting to what happened last week with Matt Canada being fired and with them having 400 yards of offense or whatever for the first time in the since Matt Canada got hired. But that's a lot. That's a full touchdown. So we need to kind of pay attention to that. After that, we have Philadelphia, 22.5 home dogs, which is crazy. Really tells you who the league thinks the best team is. And then Denver at 22.5. So we can also take a look really quick at projected passing touchdowns. Highest projected passing touchdowns on the slate is Miami at 1.95, followed by Houston at 1.89, and then a big drop to Denver at 1.55. So this Houston-Denver game should have a lot of goodness overall. Just two teams that are good at passing. We also have Washington at 1.52 expected passing touchdowns up against Miami. So those are kind of the two games that look the best. Most expected rushing touchdowns, Miami at 1.73. So Mostert, Akan, whatever the fuck his name is, those guys look good as well. Then Philadelphia at 1.3 and San Francisco at 1.2. So Philadelphia and San Francisco is a game where their expected rushing touchdowns are some of the highest on the slate, which makes for a really interesting dynamic. I mean, people continue to not play DeAndre Swift, even though he's in these games where the high rushing touchdown expectation is there. Granted, it's because Jalen Hurts has the tush push, but is what it is. After that, we can take a look at dropbacks. Highest dropback volume is Washington. They've been the highest pretty much every slate they've been on for 8 weeks straight. Followed by Carolina, who's implied for only 16 real-life points, and then New Orleans at 39.29. And then Indianapolis at 38.36. Worth noting that Indianapolis, they're projected to run quite a few plays, but Zach Moss is going to be giga chalk, like 60% owned chalk, up against Tennessee defense and with a relatively high dropback rate. Designed rushing attempt rate, if we sort that, they're not even up there in like the top upper echelons. We have Atlanta above them, Detroit above them, the Rams, we have Miami, we have Pittsburgh above them. Like Zach Moss, even though he's going to get a large chunk of the volume, we don't expect them to have a significantly large design rushing attempt volume anyway. Another thing that I want to take a look at here in the research sheets is going to be ownership trends. So we're going to take a look at this before we start taking a look at stacks. So this is something that I do to track ownership across the week, starting on Thursday and then moving up through Sunday. So I obviously haven't run Sundays yet because it's only 7:30 in the morning. I'll run this last one at about 10:30 or so. But this just lets us know who is trending in terms of ownership and what way they're going. So you can see that Brevin Jordan started out with 0 ownership basically on Thursday and has moved all the way up to 19% ownership projection on Saturday. His trend is massive. He might end up being like 25% owned. Depends on what Sunday says. If he moves down a little bit on Sunday, maybe down to like 16 or 17%, then we should expect 15 to 20. But based on this trend, we would expect somewhere around 25 to 30% on Brevin Jordan. After that, Curtis Samuel's been getting a little bit of steam. Deebo Samuel, a little bit of steam. Josh Downs, a little bit of steam as well. The highest projected ownership on the slate looks like Zach Moss, for sure, at 54%. He's going to be 60% or so, 50 to 60%. He's just too cheap, and he has had really good games in the past. If we look at the negative trends here, we have guys like George Pickens, Jalen Waddle, George Kittle, DeAndre Hopkins. All these guys kind of started in the teens and have moved their way down in the single digits. Those are guys that we like to kind of take some shots on because it shows that people were interested in them, that they do have upside, but that people have just kind of given up on them throughout the week for one reason or another. Jalen Waddle, really, there's no reason why he would drop 10% ownership throughout the week. There's just not. There wasn't anything that happened. George Pickens, there's no reason why he would drop so much ownership throughout the week. Kittle, same thing. DeAndre Hopkins, maybe it's because Treylon Burks is back, but overall, like, people were interested in him, and his ownership has been cut in half. So, based on those things, and kind of the macro concepts and where the chalk's at, Zach Moss looks like kind of bad chalk. The rushing volume for Indianapolis is not really there. They are kind of middle in the pack in rushing volume, and we have a lot of different running backs that are in way better spots. Just from looking at the research sheets and looking at kind of the macro data on dropbacks and design rushing attempts, like We could use Bijan Robinson. We can use Jamal Williams or Jamar Gibbs. We could use Kyron Williams, who's probably one of the best plays on the slate. We could use Raheem Mostert or Devon Khan. We could use Jalen Warren or Najee Harris. We could use DeAndre Swift, Christian McCaffrey. We can use Jerome Ford. Like, we can use Alvin Kamara. I mean, there's like probably 15 to 20 running backs that, or not 15 to 20. There's probably like 10 to 15 running backs that we could use that have a higher design rushing expectation or a higher rushing touchdown expectation or better receiving work expectations. Like, Zach Moss looks fine as a $4,600 running back with volume, but he doesn't look like somebody who I would lock in all my lineups. And at 60% owned, he's probably somebody that you want to fade. Overall for the stacks, though, really, I mean, Miami, Washington looks like a good game. Denver, Houston looks like a good game. And then San Francisco, Philadelphia looks like a good game. I don't even think you need to look elsewhere. I mean, I guess we're going to take a look as well at some ownership and some implied team totals. Pittsburgh looks really interesting with a really nice team total. Tells me that the market is really believing in the change that happened when Matt Canada left. So I guess we'll take a look at that as well. But overall, man, this is a really condensed slate. Let's go ahead and move on to the stacks and range of outcomes. Go ahead and zoom in here again. So the highest overall projection for any stack is Tua, Tyreek, and Jalen Waddle, and it's worth noting that the vast majority of this comes from Tyreek Hill. Tua and Tyreek are really the combination that you would want. Combining with Jalen Waddle is fine. They do have a team total of 30. There's no reason why Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle can't get here. But based on how expensive it is, costs $25,000 to stack this, people are not going to go here. Like, the ownership here is going to be almost entirely centered around Tyreek Hill, who should be somewhere between 20 and 25% owned. But, like, Tua and Jalen Waddle are not going to be a part of this ownership because we've seen in the past that when it comes to stacking, even this Philadelphia stack, 24,000, when it comes to using almost half of your entire salary on any given stack, people just won't do it. So I expect these both to be really low-owned combinations. If you can make Tua, Tyreek, and Jalen Waddle work, then you should. I said in Discord yesterday that if you were planning on using just Tua and Tyreek Hill together, you should just use Tyreek Hill and not pair him with Tua. In order for Tua to get there over the quarterbacks that we have on the slate, he needs to throw for 3 or more passing touchdowns. And you shouldn't expect all 3 of those to go to Tyreek Hill. You should expect at least one to go to either Jalen Waddle or Devon Khan or whoever the fuck else is on that team, right? So Tyreek Hill is kind of the linchpin here, but if you expect for Miami to put up 35, 40 real-life points on Washington here, then you should be using him with Jalen Waddle, and you should be trying to figure out how to make this price tag work. After that, we have Philadelphia. Team total only 22.5, kind of an outlier in these top stacks. It's considerably lower than San Francisco. It's lower by a full field goal than San Francisco, lower by about a field goal than Houston, and it's pretty expensive, 24-3. So Dallas Goedert is not going to be back, so A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are totally fine to play together, but pretty expensive. After that, Houston, and then San Francisco stacks, and then another Miami stack with Tyreek Hill and Durham Smythe, and then Detroit, and then the Chargers here for Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Gerald Everett, right? Charger stacks are kind of expensive, $20K for a 22.75 total. But again, 22.5 here for Jalen Hurts. So let's see. Let's go ahead and sort this by 4X and take a look at some value. So Denver with Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton, and Jerry Jeudy is only 15.8K. God, that fucking sucks. This is the first time that I'm looking at the slate, and that price is terrible. That price is really, really bad. There's going to be a lot of ownership on Denver. So Denver Houston is going to have the highest ownership of any stack this slate, just based on that. It's going to be centered around the Denver side because paying just $16K for a team that has been good up against Houston, who has just been involved in pretty much every single winning GPP lineup in 7 straight weeks or something. That's going to be a really popular lineup. After that, we do have San Francisco with Purdy, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle. That's strong value as well. And then Washington and then Atlanta. We do have Desmond Ridder, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts lineup here. Overall, the ownership is going to be low enough on Atlanta stacks that it makes sense, but that median is really, really low. Let's also sort this by team totals really quick. So we have Miami, and then we have Detroit. Those make sense. San Francisco, yep. Houston, and then Pittsburgh. And look, man, Pittsburgh is that every single stack is less than 15K, and I don't think that there's going to be all that much ownership on Pittsburgh. Like I see 26% here, 25% here, but I don't think that people are going to go there. I think that it's going to be more condensed on Denver, Houston, San Francisco, Miami, and Philadelphia. So I don't know, man. I think that Pittsburgh looks like a really interesting stack, especially based on this team total. And then nobody is going to be on the Chargers, like, whatsoever. And mostly because they're relatively expensive, but, like, that's a good spot to be. If you can get on Keenan Allen at low ownership, we always like to do that. And then Philadelphia and Denver. So based on all of that, I really like overall for, like, the top end stacks. I don't know how much I like Miami. I like, if I can afford it, that's awesome. But I have not tried to build yet this morning, and spending half of your salary on anything is really, really tough. Detroit looks awesome. Really, really like Detroit. Really like San Francisco. San Francisco is priced appropriately. I think that those are kind of two really interesting stacks to go with. And then for values, going with either Denver or Pittsburgh just makes sense. Denver, I do fear is going to be really fucking highly owned, though. Like, I could see Russell Wilson being like 15% owned, and both Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton being 20+% owned, just out of fucking nowhere. Let's take a look at some of the individual ownerships here. Let's take a look at quarterbacks. So for quarterback, projected ownership looks like Brock Purdy, 15%, Russell Wilson, 13%, and then everybody else under 10. That's typical for quarterbacks. I would expect Russell Wilson and Purdy ownership to kind of flip. I expect Russell Wilson to be the higher owned of those two. Taking a look at running backs. Yeah, overall, Zach Moss chalk is just going to be super, super, super heavy. I get it. He's 4,600, projects really well. I get it. In small field contests, you just lock him in. In large field, it's a conversation. And then Rashad White, Christian McCaffrey, Javonte Williams, Jalen Warren, and Ramondre Stevenson. Najee Harris not getting ownership. Really, he should be about half as owned as Jalen Warren, and makes a lot of sense. Alvin Kamara getting no ownership is very silly. Jahmyr Gibbs getting no ownership is very silly. Kyren Williams, 7,200, getting no ownership is really silly. There's a lot of quarterback or a lot of running backs that are just not getting ownership. Like Alvin Kamara, Jahmyr Gibbs, Ramondre Stevenson at 16%, Kyren Williams at 10%, Austin Eckler. I get Austin Eckler. He's looked really, really bad. Breece Hall, Derrick Henry. I thought that he was going to be low on last week, but, you know, it's fucking wrong about that. So pretty interesting on running backs. Let's take a look at wide receivers. So overall, Tyreek Hill projecting for about 30%. I'll buy that. And Courtland Sutton, 20%. Yep, that makes sense. Jerry Jeudy, only 11%. But 4,700, I think that he's going to get more ownership than that. Elijah Moore, people are... Why the fuck are people playing Elijah Moore? What? Why are people playing Elijah Moore? 3,500 and you're, like, willing to trust Joe fucking Flacco? Like, Joe Flacco's, like, 50 years old. Don't play Cleveland wide receivers. Especially at 15% owned. What the fuck are we doing here? What is this? If he's 15% owned, this week is free. Josh Downs, great play. Totally fine with that. A lot of this makes sense outside of Elijah Moore. Just don't play Elijah Moore. That'd be very silly. Sorting by median, let's see. Keenan Allen, relatively underowned. Should be higher than that. But at 9K, people would rather play A.J. Brown or Tyreek Hill, for sure. I don't buy that Tank Dell is only going to be 11% owned. I think he's going to be like 20% owned. Puka Nacua at 4% owned is pretty sick. And then Adam Thielen just dropping down, and I'm going to fucking play Adam Thielen. I'm going to hate myself. All right. So we won't look at tight ends because tight ends are kind of inconsequential. But overall, so far, based on all that, man, don't fucking play Elijah Moore. He's the piece of chalk that you just don't play this week. I didn't see really Pittsburgh players anywhere in the top ownership. I think they're going to come in low owned. Uh, yeah, overall, chalk, I mean, mostly makes sense. Zach Moss is going to be really heavily owned. Tyreek Hill is going to be heavily owned. Don't play Elijah Moore, and just look to get on kind of some of the lower owned pieces of these really popular games. I do think that Houston and Denver are going to have more ownership than what we're projecting so far. Let's go ahead and jump into the Stack Finder and finish up this video. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit shorter. Let's go ahead and do QB plus twos. Let's give it $40,000 to work with and just run some stack analysis. So the top overall looks like Tyreek Hill, Tua, and Jalen Waddle, followed by Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and Devontae Smith. Those are the top 2 overall projections and top 2 overall projections overall. After that, Houston, and then Detroit, and then some Chargers, and then some Rams. So that makes sense. Seeing that the Chargers are here at really low ownership doesn't surprise me. Keenan Allen is just not getting enough ownership, and Puka Nacua is just not getting enough ownership. So those both make a lot of sense. I am a little bit disappointed not to see any San Francisco. I am a little bit disappointed not to see any Pittsburgh. That's relatively interesting. And the only Houston stack that we actually get is CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, and Noah Brown. We don't even get one with Tank Dell. So maybe Tank Dell won't come in higher owned than he should. But if he does, then this is actually the Houston stack that the model's like. Oh, and there's no Denver here. Denver looks way over-owned for their ownership as well. Let's go ahead and go QB plus 1. Take a look at some stack analysis. So Tua Tyreek, obviously, Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and then Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert. And that only projects for 12% ownership. So that's kind of going to be the cutoff. And then CJ Stroud and Noah Brown at only 12K. After that, you drop down into Rams, Atlanta, and then Chargers. So Atlanta keeps popping up here. Chargers keep popping up here. Maybe we should be paying a little bit more attention to Atlanta stacks. I'm not really super into that, but Desmond Ridder did look okay last week, and they should be able to win that game really, really easily. I don't think there's any reason to think that they can't win that game. And then Charger stacks. So I do like Charger stacks overall. Let's go ahead and take a look really quick at some of my own stuff here. So this build up, we'll zoom in here so we can see a little bit better. This build up looks at expected PPR value against ownership, and also expect PPR points and utility and stuff like that. So, but right now I'm just sorting by expected value. So David Njoku, his expected PPR is the best value overall based on his salary. Only looking at 14% ownership. But again, I'm not trusting fucking Joe Flacco on anything. Again, not trusting Joe Flacco on anything. So erase Cleveland from your mind here. But Zach Moss, his expected PPR is obviously really good for his price tag. His actual PPR points has been 16. That's why he's getting 54% ownership. But then after that, I mean, you have 9% ownership on Kyren Williams, 9% on Alvin Kamara, 5% on Noah Brown. People are just ignoring Noah Brown, which is hilarious. Jahmyr Gibbs, Logan Thomas, Cade Otton looks pretty good at 3,200. Like, you'd rather play him than somebody like Brevin Jordan, right? No ownership on Johnny Smith, no ownership on DeAndre Swift. You know, lots of really, really good spots here based on expected value. If we look at expected PPR points on this slate, Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey lead the way overall up top, followed by Tyreek Hill and Keenan Allen. Price tags mostly make sense until we get to Kyren Williams, who at 7,200, I mean, he should be 8,500. He should be up here with, you know, Austin Eckler and AJ Brown. Like, he's underpriced. We should take advantage of Kyren Williams consistently here. After that, we just have low ownership on these relatively expensive players. We have low ownership on Gibbs. We have low ownership on Akan. We have low ownership on DeAndre Swift. We have low ownership on David Montgomery. Like, so many of these guys are low owned. Nobody's playing this mid range because they're just jamming in the Zach Moss chalk and then going stars and scrubs. Let's go ahead and sort by ownership so that we can kind of see a better representation of that. So Zach Moss, Tyreek Hill, and Rashad White. That's where people are mostly starting lineups this week. Cortland Sutton's only 5,400. Brevin Jordan, for whatever reason, is going to be super highly owned in this matchup. I don't know why. And then we have couple running backs. We have Josh Downs. We have Deontay Johnson. I mean, these things make kind of sense. But somebody like Juwan Johnson, that's too highly owned for somebody in Juwan Johnson's spot. Elijah Moore, like, I'm not going to fucking play Elijah Moore at 3,500 with the ghost of Joe Flacco back there. So overall, let's kind of wrap this up because I'm kind of rambling at this point. The stacks that we are most interested in are going to be Miami by far, and then followed by that Houston-Denver game, which looks really good, but I'm worried about ownership. I'd probably prefer the Houston side, if we're being honest on that side. And then that Philadelphia-San Francisco game, it kind of looks a little bit overowned, but I do like the San Francisco side. I think that they are too cheap. For values, it makes a lot of sense to go with Denver and Pittsburgh. I'm really into Pittsburgh stacks this week. They just are not getting the ownership respect that they should be, and people aren't on to Jalen Warren. And if Kenny Pickett somehow figures out how to throw a fucking touchdown, that's going to kill Jalen Warren's upside as well. So we like to directly attack chalk in that way, especially when running back chalk is kind of unjustified. So Miami, San Francisco, Houston, Denver, and Pittsburgh. Those are kind of the main stacks. Outside of that, don't play Elijah Moore. That's kind of like the main thing here this week. You just shouldn't play Elijah Moore. He doesn't make any sense. I don't know why he's 15% owned. With Zach Moss, you just lock him in small field. I think I'm leaning on fading in large field. 60% ownership is going to be really, really high. I've not seen any negative sentiment on him whatsoever. I've only seen people talking about how good of a play he is. And I just don't think that the volume is as good as a lot of other running backs on this slate. I think that while he is a really good bet for somewhere between 10 and 15 fantasy points, I don't know that he has the ceiling to compete with a lot of the other running backs that we have on this slate. So to me, it looks like this slate is more going to be ruled by expensive running backs rather than cheap ones. If you can go expensive running back and pay down at wide receiver, that's probably going to make more sense to me. Especially if you go Denver, right? If you go Denver, overstack the Denver-Houston game, and then just pay up at running back with like Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey, or Alvin Kamara and Kyron Williams or something like that, I think that makes a lot of sense. As far as players that look way undervalued, I mean, just sorting by expected value, like Alvin Kamara, Kyron Williams, Noah Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, K-Dot, and DeAndre Swift, like all those guys look way underowned. Devon Khan at 6,900 is not going to get ownership. He doesn't necessarily project especially well, but like we've seen what he's able to do. He was giga chalk getting like 9 touches a game, and we might be able to expect him to be the lead back here. Coming back from another kind of injury scare. They were just being careful with him. He looks really interesting at 6,900. So these kind of like 6,500 and up running backs look really, really good. And I think that's where our focus should be. Overall, looks like a pretty good slate. I'm not even regged yet. I should go reg. But overall, looks like a good one. I'm also going to have an article later on this morning. But hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, my name is James Cool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out over at Paydirt_DFS on Twitter. But overall, thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for all the support. And let's go ahead and crush out week 13. Peace.